One thing that's really common in distribution is single determinants that are used to measure people's productivity. So a lot of times that's called units per hour, UPH. And that units is different based on what the activity is. So for, full case picking a pallet, it might be cases per hour. Or if you're a break case picker and you're out in the racks and you're picking eaches and items into a tote like e-commerce, you might look at locations visited per hour or what's called a line per hour. The problem with those metrics, though, is it doesn't really flex with the change in business or with the work that's being performed. You can see here we have an example of a grocery picker, and they're just picking, full cases to pallet. And the question is, who did more? Right? This is an hour worth of work. Worker A did 500 cases, worker B 200, worker C 50. If you're just looking at units per hour, cases per hour, worker A is clearly, more productive, right? But if we drill down and look at what the actual work was made up of, worker A only had to go to 8 locations, worker B 20, and worker C 40. But you look at that now and you're looking at 500 cases, 8 locations, worker C is at 50 cases, but 40 locations. So very few cases per location. It starts to kind of color it up a little bit. So who did more, worker A, B, or C? And you dig into aisles, worker A only had to go to 2 aisles to get to those 8 locations. Worker C went to 40. Other travel on the whole warehouse. Now, if we look at feet traveled to complete that work, worker A only had 180 feet, worker B 350, worker C 2,000 feet. So clearly it's going to take a lot longer to get those cases picked if you're traveling 2,000 feet to do the work. And then we look at number of orders. Worker A just had a single order that was 500 cases, whereas worker C had 10 orders that made up those 50 cases, so only 5 cases per order. So it's just really difficult for any manager, any supervisor to look at that. So they just bleed it down into cases per hour because that's the easiest metric. And that's where engineered labor standards comes in and a labor management system, because it can take all this information and it can pull it together and equate it back to the number of minutes that it should take to complete that work. So we know how long it takes to travel 2,000 feet, right? If you're walking, it's 2.78 miles per hour. If you're on a vehicle, it depends, but those labor management systems can look at acceleration, run rate, and decel and get a time per each stop. And so it can add up the time that it takes to do that travel across those aisles. And when you're hitting a new location, you might need to scan the first product or scan the location to verify you're in the right place. The labor management system has the ability to give you time per location as well as time per case. And even in that case itself, it can look at the cube and the weight of the item, like how big it is and how much it weighs. And then it can even look at the storage medium that you're pulling it from. Are you pulling it from a big bulk location or a case flow? Are you pulling it from the floor or a top location? And it can look at that case cube and weight and the storage medium that you're pulling from it and give it a very discrete, time for each of those different activities. And we're not building those times. Those times have been built for 30, 40 years. So we're just pulling those from matrix to apply it. So it actually applies really quickly. But then you get to the answer, right? When you take into account all the locations and feet traveled, number of orders, and number of cases, worker C did 64 minutes of work in 60 minutes. So they're beating that minimum expectation. And then worker A, who had that cherry order, when you're just looking at cases per hour, but when you look at the actual work, that's only 21 minutes of work. So 50, 60% below standard. So it's just, an obvious example of why engineered labor standards are a better fit than UPH. And then on top of that, as your order mix changes, as you go through seasonality, as the worker gets a big order or a small order, or a gigantic order, or a bunch of teeny orders, it's going to give them the right amount of time to pick that versus just looking at lines per hour, cases per hour.